I have read 9 books in February, and today I'm going to let you know if you should read them too. I read 1 nonfiction book in February and 1 fantasy book in February, and the last 7 of the books I read in the month were romance books. Unsurprisingly, the month of love was filled with books about love, and that just seems right to me. We're gonna save romance for last, and first I'm gonna talk about my nonfiction read of the month. One of my goals in 2025 is to read at least 1 nonfiction book every month, and in January I started a couple and just didn't end up continuing them, but in February I did read 101 Essays to Change the Way You Think. I kind of read this over like the span of a week, and I actually listened to a lot of it too on audiobook. Honestly, I think there's good insights in these essays, but I feel like sitting down and just reading it through wasn't the way to do it. I feel like a lot of the things that are in this book I've heard of before are kind of well known, especially if you're in the health and wellness space or listen to educational podcasts or science podcasts, which I do a lot of. A lot of these things weren't surprising. It didn't really dig deep into anything. It just kind of was a list of things. For example, 10 questions to ask yourself when you don't know where your life should go next. And I think this could be helpful if you are in this certain situation that each essay is talking about, but for me, this feels repetitive. I feel like it's just saying the same things over and over, and it goes into a little bit of depth, but not much. I am happy I finally finished this book because I've had this book for I don't know how long, years at this point. I had read a couple essays a few years ago and just never picked it back up. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend this book. I can understand why it's so talked about in self-help space, but I just feel like there's better books out there in my opinion. Also, I'm not gonna rate this. I don't really rate nonfiction. Now let's talk about my fantasy book I read in March, and that is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. I literally love this book so much. This is the second book in the Emily Wilde series. The first book is following our main character Emily as she is working on her encyclopedia. She has to go out and study this last species of folk in order to do that, and she's in this kind of remote place, and who does she run into but her academic rival, Wendell Bambley. And she doesn't want him there. She wants to do the work herself. She doesn't want her work being compromised or potentially stolen. It just causes a whole array of things. She also has to go on missions and stuff, and we learn about the folk and the fairy in this world, and I just loved that first book so much. It was very different from a lot of the fantasies I have read. It was kind of slow, and I guess it's described as a cozy fantasy, which I don't know if that's why I kind of felt a difference in between the normal fantasies I read and that book, but it was definitely slower, but it wasn't necessarily not high stakes. I feel like lives were still in jeopardy. It was kind of dark with the nature of the folk in this book and how they treat the humans, but it definitely wasn't intense, action-packed. It didn't feel urgent life or death, but like lives were at stake, if that makes sense. And I wonder if that's just because we're seeing all these events through the lens of an academic, and she's very impartial. The book is basically written like her journal, and in this book we are continuing that journey. She has a new project, the Map of the Otherlands. I loved the additional characters we got in this book. I loved seeing Emily, seeing Wendell. I love seeing different settings and learning more about the folk in this world, as well as seeing our character grow and step out of her comfort zone in certain regards. I also love seeing she is so badass in her knowledge of the fairies, and I thought that was so cool to see even more in this book. I'm really excited to read the third one, hopefully in March. I gave this one 5 stars. I think I gave the first one 4.5. So high hopes for the last book in this series. I would absolutely recommend if you like a cozy fantasy. I don't think this is a fantasy for everyone, but it was honestly just like a really nice breath of fresh air from the type of fantasy that I normally read. So if you like cozy fantasy, I'm sure you'd probably like this book. If you like a slower fantasy that's kind of different from what you're used to, as well as this seemed more like fairy tale versus a trial fantasy, for example. If that seems like something you're into, I would absolutely recommend this book. 5 stars again. Getting into my romance reads of the month, which I read a lot of them, and then I didn't realize, but in the entire month of February I read the entire When in Rome series, which I think is the fastest I've read a series in a long time. So I'm really happy that I was able to complete this series. I started the month with When in Rome. We are following a pop star and a small town baker in the setting of Rome, Kentucky. The setting in this series really shines through. The small town aspects, the nosy town members, the gossip chain is such a crucial part of this story, and you can really just feel it throughout all 3 books, and it gets introduced to us here in When in Rome. It's kind of an opposites attract, and literally the encapsulation encapsulation of a grumpy male main character. It even says, I don't even know how many times grumpy is said in this book to describe him, but literally that's what he is. And then Amelia is having fun coming out of her shell in this town because she feels like in her pop stardom she hasn't been able to really be herself anymore. So she is having fun poking at Noah and rediscovering kind of who she is. I thought this was such a cute read, and I'm so happy I read it this month and picked up this series. I gave this one 3.5 stars. There was some things that I noticed just throughout that kind of took me out of the reading experience, which I talked about in regards to the second book, which I'll get to, but it does it the same thing in this book where the character will be going into a thought train or reminiscing on something, and then they'll kind of jump out of that and just be like, anyways, back to whatever I was doing in this present moment. That was just kind of startling to me as the reader, and being like, hey, you're reading a book with words on it. Just took me out of the story. But other than that, honestly, no complaints. 3.5 stars. I didn't connect to this one as much as the other ones, but I still really, really enjoyed it. I then read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, and oh my gosh. Ali Hazelwood continues to be one of my favorite authors. This is definitely not my favorite Ali Hazelwood book, but I just love the way she writes. I can binge her books so easily. She is stepping out of her STEM romance and I guess fantasy. She's really kind of genre hopped, and I honestly don't hate that. I kind of love that for her, that she's dipped her toes into different genres. She is definitely still classic Ali Hazelwood in all the different genres. All her little references, the way she writes still is consistent, and I love that. So in this book, we are following, I think it's Scarlett? Yeah. Scarlett, who is a junior at Stanford, and she is a diver there, and then Lucas is a swimmer on the swim team. So swimming and diving, kind of the same team, but kind of not. It seems like they have literally nothing in common until this one thing comes out about them. I feel like a lot of this book revolves around a side character, and that just pisses me off. And throughout reading, I just really kind of ignored the side character, even though she was brought up a lot. And so I feel like that helped me get past kind of that aspect of the book. But also loved how we still have like her nod to STEM romances because they are both pre-med students, so they have that in common as well. But I just loved throughout seeing the female main character come out of her shell, seeing her bloom. There's also some content warnings of things that are discussed in this book, so definitely make sure you check those out if that's not something you're interested in reading about. I gave this 4 stars. Classic Ali Hazelwood. I loved her. It was really interesting, especially the swimming and diving aspects. I feel like that was a really prevalent part of the book, and it was really interesting to learn about college athletes in that respect, because I feel like it's hockey, or what else have I feel like hockey is like the big one that I've read a lot of sports college romances on, so it was fun to get something different in this. I then picked up the last Abby Jimenez book that I needed to read on her backlog, and that is Part of Your World. I think I'm giving this book 5 stars. I was kind of like at least a 4.5 when I was reading it, but I loved this book so much. I love the characters so much. Our female main character is a doctor and comes from this affluent family, and so she has a lot of expectations on her, but that's not really who she wants to be. The male main character lives in this small town and is the mayor, owns this bed and breakfast, and kind of does a lot for this small town, and she ends up having her car break down there, and who does she meet but the mayor. I feel like classic Abby Jimenez just shown through in this book. A cute rom-com that'll make you laugh, but it also has such emotional depth. I feel like the longing and the yearning in this book for each other really got to me, and I loved being in this small town. There was also like a lot of things going in the backgrounds of their lives that the other character isn't privy to, so that kind of comes to a head at the end, and I thought it was just done so well. I loved getting to see some of the characters in Abby Jimenez other books, particularly Yours Truly, which we'll get to, but overall this book just touched my heart and I loved it so much. If you love Abby Jimenez, or if you've been meaning to read her, I feel like this is a great book to start. I actually didn't start with this book. I read Yours Truly first because it was on Kindle Unlimited, I think in 2023, so you definitely don't need to read this one before Yours Truly, even though it happens before Yours Truly. But if you haven't read any of her books, definitely go for this one. It's one of my favorite by far. It's right up there with Yours Truly just for the summer and Happy Ever After playlist. I'm like, how do people rate their favorite authors' books? I don't understand, because they're all my favorites. I love them all for different reasons, you know? But anyways, 5 stars. Absolutely adored this book. I then did a reread of Yours Truly, and I didn't read this in a video, I just kind of read it in the background since it was a reread, but after reading Part of Your World and seeing the character in this book, I really wanted to reread Yours Truly, and I'm so happy I did. I really love this book. This book deals with anxiety, and I feel like it's portrayed so well in our male main character, and you as a reader can really understand, and I feel like almost better understand people with anxiety and like maybe what their thought process might look like and have more empathy. That's what I love about reading fiction, is you can see so many different point of views, and even though it's through fictional characters, like people in the real world go through these similar things. Brianna and Jacob are both emergency room doctors. They run into each other. They start off on the wrong foot, but they come back together in such a good way, and it's so respecting, it's so loving. I loved how thoughtful Jacob was. I loved how Brianna just like fully accepted him, even with like the anxiety where some people might get standoffish or not really understand. Brianna's like, this is just the way he is, this is just what he needs. Like, for example, not a spoiler, just something that happens, looking up the menu or sending pictures of a place, providing ample description before entering a new environment. That is something that Brianna does for Jacob, and I just think that is the cutest thing ever, and the embodiment of action speaking louder than words. I also loved, so it's called Yours Truly, and a nod to letters back and forth between the main characters, and I loved reading them and how they progressed. It made me so happy. And then there's also the twist at the end with Brianna and what she's been kind of going through. She's been going through a divorce, and things get brought back up as the relationship with Jacob progresses that I didn't expect at all, and forgot about honestly the first time I read it. So in the reread I was like, oh my gosh. I gave this 5 stars the first time. I'm giving it 5 stars again. Abby Jimenez, I love you. Keep doing what you're doing. You're amazing. I then continued the When in Rome series with Practice Makes Perfect. I enjoyed this book honestly a little bit more than the first one. I gave it still 3.5 stars. These books were just so easy to fly through, honestly. This book, we're following the sister of Noah, and I think each book will be about one of the siblings. We're back in Rome, Kentucky. We get all those small town vibes we got in the first one, and I feel like we get even more of the nosy neighbors. The townspeople really feel protective of this family because of things in the past. They've been in this town their whole lives, etc., etc. And then the townspeople also have their own kind of dynamics in between each other. Like if you read the books, Mabel and Harriet's dynamic that shines through in all the books is just honestly some good comedic relief when you're reading this. So basically we're following Annie, who I want to say is the youngest sibling. She is kind of seen a certain way in town. She's kind of seen as innocent. She runs this flower shop. She's seen as sweet, but she doesn't feel that way. She feels like town has kind of put her in a box, and that's not actually who she is. She has this secret, nothing crazy. She just reads like romance novels. They actually all kind of do, which is funny, but that's a big part of this book, and like steamy romance novels. So she like feels like she has to hide that because everyone sees her a certain way. And then all the siblings kind of have, there was this tragic event that happened when they were younger, and they all have kind of dealt with it in different ways, which we have definitely seen, especially once you get to the 3rd book. The male main character is Will, who is the bodyguard of Amelia. He kind of has this like playboy reputation. He has tattoos, as you can see, and he's kind of sworn off relationships, but Annie really wants to get married, and they kind of have this instant attraction, but no, they can't do anything about it because they want totally different things. So he signs up to be her dating coach. I'm sure you can imagine where that leads. But again, I really enjoyed it. Again, with the yearning and longing, that's kind of been a theme throughout a lot of the romance books I read this month. It is extremely palpable in this book. Like I said, they kind of have an instant attraction, but it just grows and grows throughout the entire book, and it's chef's kiss. What's a romance without some yearning and longing in it? I then completed the series with Beg, Borrow, Steal, and this 5 stars. I love this book so much. I thought the tension and banter and longing was palpable in the previous books. This one takes it to a whole new level. We are following Emily, who is the oldest sister. There are 3 sisters, 1 brother, and I believe the last book will be about 3rd sister. So Emily is an elementary school teacher, and so is Jack. They've had this rivalry since college. So basically since they've known each other, where they'll kind of go for things the other person wants, go for the job, go for the desk, play the teacher's favorite, blah blah blah. They've been teaching together. He kind of leaves the town after he's engaged. He comes back to the town, Rome, later, is no longer engaged. So we get to see their rivalry. We get to see kind of what led up to this moment. We see a little bit of it in the past. This book takes place in the summer though, so we didn't really get to see kind of their interactions at school and like what that would look like, besides some flashbacks or mentions of what has been done or like what they've done to each other other in the past, but I just loved this book. I had such a good time. I feel like this one, even though they all kind of have this underlying theme of grief because of the tragic event, I feel like this one really stuck out to me, having themes of grief. It also had a really interesting subplot where the female main character is secretly writing a romance novel and the male main character is secretly a best-selling author. So that was super interesting to read about, and I also just loved how they bloomed, how Emily bloomed, how the characters grew throughout the books. I feel like through each of these books we just get to see all the characters grow, and I'm really excited, especially after what was talked about in this book between the third sister. I'm really excited to see her story and where that takes her. I have an idea, and I think if you've read this book you will also have an idea, but I'm just excited to read about it and see how she grows through her own journey. They also unexpectedly end up being neighbors when he moves back to this small town, so that's definitely like a forced proximity thing that happens. And then I also do love, I mentioned this when I was reading the book in the reading vlog, that while they do poke and prod at each other, there's still like this deep underlying mutual respect for the other person. Like there's a line they won't cross, and while they never say they won't cross the line, things get brought up in this book where you know, or they say things to each other where you as the reader know they're not going to cross this line because they truly respect each other as human beings and honestly might, you know, really like the other person and actually not be enemies. That leaves me with my last romance read of the month, which was Taming 7 by Chloe Walsh. I completed the released Boys of Taming series this month, and I'm really happy I did. This was the shortest of the books at around 450, I think, pages, and I don't know if we're gonna get another Claire and Gibbsy book, but I really hope we do, especially with the way this one ended. So the Boys of Taming series basically follows this friend group in Ireland. I don't know how to describe like the reading experience. It's definitely like a guilty pleasure read, but it will suck you in so hard. These stories are so tragic. It's like a soap opera. It's dramatic. The worst things that can happen to people happen to these characters. I just grew so attached to them, and so reading about Claire and Gibbsy was just what I needed. They are two friends out of the friend groups. They've known each other since they were babies. They grew up across the street for each other, and they've been best friends and basically are in a relationship without the title of being in a relationship. They say like I love you to each other, but they don't take it anywhere beyond friendship level, even though they both like have deep feelings for the other, and you find out why it's hard for them to be together in this book. I will say I really love their story, but I wish we got more of them in this book. I feel like this book really kind of reminisced on past characters and the couples from the previous books, but we also focused a lot on like other characters, and while I get that makes sense because everything is connected and this friend group is connected in really like good ways surrounding rugby and other things, but they're also connected to each other because of tragedies that have happened in their life, and so that dynamic especially gets brought up in this book, and how some characters don't really get along, that's very prominent. Also, the tragedy in this book just broke my heart. I was like bawling my eyes out. I kind of caught on to it early on, but when it like came about and when you're getting some like oh my gosh getting some on-page descriptions, a little bit of what happens and what the character goes through, it's literally just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart so much for this character. I think I'm gonna go around to 4 stars for this book. I didn't love it as much as the first ones, and I really hope we do get another Claire and Gibbsy, even though I'm not sure if we will, since there were supposed to be 12 books. Not sure if that's happening anymore since they've been traditionally published, but I said this in my reading vlog, but if you know, let us know. But anyways, that wraps up all 9 books I read in February. I didn't read as much as I read in January, which I think I read 11 books in January, so I'm definitely on track to meet my reading goal of 100 books this year, which is exciting. I love books. There's just so many books to read, as we all know. The more I read, the more books that I want to read. But as always, if you've read any of these books in this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. I hope this was helpful if you've been wanting to pick up one of these books. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stick around. I have some exciting videos coming out. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you hopefully in the next one. Bye.